everybody on mute. We are going to ask that everyone turn off their cameras for this so we can spotlight Congresswoman Meng and Adeola for this conversation. Thank you so much. We might have some people that will be joining us a little bit later on, but we're going to go ahead and get started to be very mindful of everyone's time. Welcome and thank you for joining us here at Feely. For those of you who's first time joining us, Feely stands for Tribe. We are New York City's female mastermind community. Feely is a place where we hold each other accountable, we support female founders and executives, and we really work hard to create change and long-lasting value for everyone's life. We started active listening that leads to conversation and understanding in June. We felt that it was very important to amplify voices and to give our platform to those who are really making change. We're so excited to have this conversation about policy reform and action this evening. And I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to my co-founder, Summer.
Yes, hi ladies and Nikolai. So we're so grateful to have two powerhouses with us today. We have Congresswoman Meng here. We have Adeola Adejobi here. So we're so grateful. You both are so powerful, so inspiring, and we cannot wait to hear the fire chat, the chemistry dynamics between you two ladies. And my co-founder Jacqueline will go ahead and introduce Congresswoman Meng, and I will introduce Adeola later.
Thank you so much. And a big shout out to our producer of this event, Kate Kelly. Thank you so much for helping to organize and be here this evening. So welcome, Congresswoman Meng. U.S. Congresswoman Meng is serving her 4th term in the United States House of Representatives. Grace represents the 6th Congressional District of New York, encompassing the New York City borough of Queens, including West, Central, and Northeast Queens. Grace is the first and only Asian American member of Congress from New York State and is the first female Congress member from Queens since her former vice presidential nominee, Geraldine Ferraro. Grace is a member of the powerful House of Appropriations Committee and its subcommittees on state and foreign operations, homeland security, commerce, justice, science, and related agencies. The Appropriations Committee is responsible for funding every federal agency, program, and project within the United States government. She also serves on the House Ethics Committee. Grace is a former senior whip and regional whip for New York and founder and co-chair of the Kids Safety Caucus for the First Baptisian Coalition in the House that promotes child safety issues. She helped create and serves as a founding member and former co-chair of the Quiet Skies Caucus, which works to mitigate excessive aircraft noise that adversely affects communities. Grace has passed several pieces of legislation and law. These include laws about religious freedom, making Queens historic sites part of National Park Service, striking Oriental from federal law, and protecting public housing residents from insufficient heat. Also signed into law were her measures to assist veterans and members of the military and provisions to improve consumer protections and safeguards for children. In addition, Grace has fought to expand opportunities for communities of color, young people, and women. She has secured resources to help local small businesses. So we are so thrilled to have Congresswoman Meng here. Thank you so much for being here. And now I pass it to Summer.
Yes, thank you for the great introduction to Congresswoman Meng, Jacqueline. So I'm so excited to express my admiration to Adeola Adejobi. So a few reasons. Adeola Adejobi is an attorney, entrepreneur, and a speaker. After obtaining her degree in political science with a minor in comparative women's studies from Spelman College, she started her career in the public service and diversity department at the law firm of Sutherland Asbill Brennan LLP. Adeola later on went on to obtain her law degree from Cornell Law School with a specialization in international legal affairs. During her time in law school, she worked at Habitat for Humanity International and the Office of Legal Affairs at the United Nations headquarters in New York City. Adeola also had a year in Beijing to study at Peking University during law school. So Adeola started her career at a nationally recognized law firm practicing commercial legislation. In 2011, she launched the Avant-Garde Network. The mission of the Avant-Garde Network is to promote diversity and inclusion through networking, recruiting, career development, training, panels, partnerships, and events. More importantly, she organically grows the organization to engage over 7,000 members by creating a collaborative ecosystem for professionals of color. Currently, Adeola is an attorney at New York City's Housing Preservation and Development Agency, the largest municipal affordable housing preservation and development agency in the nation. Since 2015, she has chaired the Real Estate Committee for the Metropolitan Black Bar Association. She is also an active member of the New York Bar Association, Council of Urban Real Estate, the Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Inc. Adeola has received several awards, including the E. Randolph Williams Award for Pro Bono Service, the New York State Bar Association's Empire State Council Awards, and the NV Magazine 2017 Movers and Shakers Awards. She is a 2017 Council of Urban Preservation Fellow, a leadership initiative created by the Council of Urban Professionals, and she sits on the advisory board of the National Black Law Students Association. And another shout out to our partnership organization, NAMIC. So thanks to Radia to connect us to Congresswoman Meng and Adeola. We're so grateful. So without further ado, we'll get into it. So the first question I have both of you ladies. So Congresswoman, we'll start with you. How did you get where you are today? And what roadblocks did you experience as a minority woman that you overcame that you can share with our tribe?
Thank you for the question, and thank you for the kind introduction. And well, maybe when if you're not as accomplished as Adeola was academically, there's always politics, right? I'm so impressed. That's, you know, we write our own bio, so it always sounds good. But Adeola, I'm so honored to be on this panel with you. You know what? I am a daughter of immigrants. My parents came to this country in the early 70s, worked in a restaurant for most of my childhood, and later on became restaurant small business owners themselves. My story is very similar to many immigrants who've come to this country from around the globe. You know, I'll be honest with you, I never thought about going into politics. As a kid, I was actually super shy. I was very introverted, never spoke up in class, never took political science classes, never even ran for student government. I mean, you could probably not have a worse resume to run for office. But, you know, I realized that even as a daughter of immigrants, that you don't have to be wealthy or powerful or have a fancy title to get involved and to help your community. Soon after law school, I founded an organization with some of my friends that literally would open our doors and help, for example, senior citizens and immigrants, you know, read and interpret their mail and help make, you know, phone calls for them, like constituent services, I guess, and really easy but necessary ways that people needed to be helped. Long story short, I ran for the New York State Assembly, the New York State Legislature. You know, I was the only Asian American legislator when I got there. And I couldn't even have my own like Asian legislative caucus. So my colleagues were kind enough to welcome me to join the Black, Puerto Rican, Hispanic, and Asian caucus. And so really learning a lot from my colleagues, and obviously at some point had the opportunity to run for Congress. It was a very sudden last minute campaign, but here I am. So it was not expected or planned necessarily.
Amazing. And how about you, Adeola?
I mean, well, I guess that, there's so much to say. Thank you so much for that amazing introduction. And Congresswoman Meng, I'm so excited for us to be having this conversation today. In terms of roadblocks, I mean, I think, the thing about it is for women generally and women of color specifically, there are all types of roadblocks. And I think some of those things generally start from the cultural aspect, right? So myself, I'm a child of immigrants as well. My parents are Nigerian. I was born in Oakland, California. And, my story is education was always really important to me because my grandmother, because she was a girl, did not have the opportunity to go to school. So when I think about the opportunities that I have within education, just to be able to learn and grow, those were some of the things that really motivated me. And I was student body president at Spelman. Funny enough, I thought I was going to get into politics at some point. I actually ran for office in Harlem, but that's a whole nother story for another day. But what I decided personally was that what was really important for me was economic impact. And how do we do that? How do we bridge and create opportunities? And I think with the roadblocks around that, the reality is for any woman, for women of color, especially, starting a business, it's not easy. You're bootstrapping, you have to be resourceful. You are doing 10 jobs. You are learning how to build the website because you can't afford to pay someone most likely. And I mean, and even before I get to that, as we're talking about roadblocks, a lot of those things are also around equal pay. If you're not getting equal pay for equal work, then you don't have the same amount of money to be able to start your business. You don't have the same amount of money to be able to put and pour back into your community or even your family. So I think that that's something that all women deal with in terms of roadblocks. And I think, clearly the work of Congresswoman Meng is helping us move the needle on that. And obviously, I think more recently with Black Lives Matter and what happened with George Floyd and Jacob Blake most recently, the reality is that the world now, the US now is starting to acknowledge some of the disparities or a lot of the disparities that exist in that space. And there's been more of an uncovering around infrastructure, around the fact that the United States itself created laws that did not allow Black people to be able to move forward economically. And those are some of the things that we're dealing with right now. So for me and my company, my goal is where there are economic opportunities, my goal is to help our network seize them.
Wow, that is extremely powerful. Thank you so much for that. And kind of moving into our next question that piggybacks off of this, and Adeola, I'll actually start with you. Where and how are the best ways for us to use our voices to create policy change? So how, we know we have ideas, but how do we actually implement them and move forward?
Yeah, so I mean, I think the where and the how is not necessarily as hard as people think it is now, right? One, there's power in a tweet that, now tweeting, people pay attention to those things. There's power in the vote. Those things are really important. And then also holding your politicians accountable, right? I think interestingly enough, in New York State, I think New York State probably has some of the most opportunities for you to be able to engage with the political process. I mean, from community boards to, city council, there's just so many different ways to have the opportunity to engage. And so I think, even organizations like yours, right, being able to come out and say, these are things that we support, these are things that we're pushing for. Obviously, for the nonprofits, they can't do that, but for the companies, you are in a position to be able to say, these are the specific types of changes that we see, and then also support politicians that you think that they're doing great work. I mean, for me, back in 2014, Avant-Garde Network, we actually hosted a fundraiser for Kamala, right? And now, 6 years later, she is a vice presidential candidate. And actually, there's been other people, and I think, for us, because we understand the disparity around raising money for Black politicians. That's something that we have, that we've had focused on, in the past. And so we've raised money for people that are now mayors. We raised money for, someone who most likely end up being VP. So I think the action step is doing something, and sometimes it can be very overwhelming. So I think the main thing is, if you can only do 3 things, do those 3 things. If I had to narrow it down to 3 easy things, I think in a way it's contribute something. Even if it's $5 or $10, that money matters, especially if you are in a district of someone that you support, because that money can be multiplied to be able to help that candidate. 2, vote is free. A lot of us have people in the past, people have fought for us and are continuing to fight for us to have the opportunity to vote. We're talking about a time right now where people are really disenfranchised, right? People are trying to literally slow down the opportunity for you to be able to vote. And then I would say, the third thing is just awareness. If you are supporting a candidate, retweet something, share something, let people know why you're supporting that candidate so that you can start to elevate that person, because there's a lot of noise in the media, and sometimes people just don't know.
Thank you so much. And Congresswoman Meng, do you have any other things to add of how we can start getting involved now and making change for policy reform?
Sure. Well, I'll tell you, as a policy maker in Congress, most of our ideas, and I want to say all, but I'm just not exactly sure, but most of our ideas have literally come from everyday people in our districts or around the country. They aren't necessarily people with fancy titles. They have a concern, they bring us the concern, and likely it's happening to other folks across the country. And those, to me, are the most effective forms of, legislation. And it's funny, Adeola talked about her grandma. People, as a daughter of immigrants, people, when I first got into politics, they would always ask me, like, who are your political mentors? I'm like, I don't know anyone political growing up. And it's not, my parents were working. It's not like we sat around the table talking about, the Kennedys or anything like that. And so I always tell people that it's my maternal grandmother. She didn't go to high school or college. She never ran for office. But to this day, she gives me the best and most effective political advice, and that's to be a good listener and to be responsive to people's needs. And so I'll give you an example of one issue that's really become near and dear to my heart that I never really thought about growing up at all. And that's the issue of access to menstrual hygiene products. So as a kid growing up, our family was pretty middle class. I was always able to afford these products. And then one day, a junior high school young lady wrote a letter to me and said that homeless people in New York were not able to get these products from the shelters, even though they were amongst the top most requested. So my staff and I, we started digging into this issue, and we worked with the then Obama administration, and fixed a regulation that basically prevented homeless shelters who get federal funds from buying these products, right, to distribute. And so because of that one young lady who planted this seed in our office's head, we've now worked on this issue in relation to people who are homeless, in relation to people who are incarcerated, and on a city level with my city colleagues, distribution of these products for free in our New York City public school system. And we now have started to work on it in the workplace and for people who have, health spending accounts, for example. And so that's just one example about why it's important for us to be a good listener, because that one young woman in my district made a huge impact, and we are still working on many inequities on this issue. But that's just one example of how one person can make a difference.
We love that. So basically just get out there and start using your voice right on the local level of the changes that you want to see, and be persistent. Thank you for that. And now I know we have a lot of questions we've collected from our tribe for you both. So Summer and I are going to step back and give you both the spotlight to ask each other these questions. And for everyone tuning in, if you have additional questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat box. Thank you.
All right, so Congresswoman Meng, I'm going to kick it off with the first question between us. And I think, I think it makes a lot of sense for me to ask you this specific question, which is, what initiatives have you had or been a part of that have had a specific impact around economic opportunities for people of color?
Well, one thing that we have seen in recent weeks is the issue of lack of broadband access for various communities across the country. This is another issue that I didn't, think much about. I never thought that this would be a priority issue for me. And I always thought, okay, it's just an issue that affects rural communities. But we have seen, and I started working on this issue with Mr. Jim Clyburn from South Carolina. He heads a relatively new task force on rural broadband. And I started working with Mr. Clyburn because I heard a lot about, as I traveled around the country for various activities, I learned that there were many communities across the country where kids don't have access to the internet. There are kids, and this has been really manifested itself publicly during the coronavirus pandemic. But prior to coronavirus, I had heard stories about kids who would go to like the parking lot of a fast food restaurant to use their Wi-Fi to do homework, or they would go to the library to use the Wi-Fi if and when it was open. And so on a good day, on a good week, there were 12 million students across this country who don't have access to the internet. And and this has changed a lot. I remember a few years ago, I asked my son to take out his textbook, and he's like, we don't have a textbook. Everything's online right now. So it's even harder for this generation if you don't have access. And so I've realized that, especially with the coronavirus pandemic, there are so many more students who are obviously unable to go to school, are participating in remote school right now and don't have access to the internet. And they're not just in rural communities, they're in New York City too. About 30% of our school students, school-age kids in New York City don't have adequate access to devices or to the internet. And this disproportionately affects communities of color. Many communities of color who are maybe newer families or lower income, they don't have enough devices, parents are working, they don't have enough access to be able to connect. And I know some companies provided, short-term access, but that was just temporary. And so that is one way that, our legislation got passed in the House twice this year, and we're still hoping for the Senate to pass it, which if passed could in the next week provide internet access and devices to millions of children across the country.
That's amazing. That's amazing work. And obviously, clearly in this environment, it really shows the disparities that exist in a lot of communities of color. So that's great work. I'm hoping that passes because education is fundamental.
Yeah.
So a follow-up question that I would have for you, and I really along the same lines, is how can policymakers continue to prepare legislation that impacts communities of color economically? And maybe there's some things that have been drafted so far that you can share, or maybe some ideas that kind of been thrown out there that you all are looking into.
Sure. One of the most serious situations during this coronavirus pandemic that we've heard about and sort of seen the evolution of in relation to this question was the assistance that small businesses got from the federal government. So, Congress passed a few pieces of legislation that provided help via grants and loans, PPP. I'm sure many people have heard those terms by now. That's just one of the most popular ones. And we realized, and this is why it's so important, as we've been talking about, for everyday folks to speak up and to tell us concerns on the ground. All of you are literally our eyes and ears on the ground and can really impact our policies. And we found out, in the early weeks, if not days, that the money from these grants and these loans that Congress passed in light of coronavirus relief was not getting to many of our small businesses that were minority owned. And so many of us realized this because, we would be in our communities during the early months of the coronavirus here in New York. And, we would ask the everyday small business owners that we frequent and depend on, like, hey, did you apply for a loan? Did you, obtain the loan? And majority of them said they weren't able to access it. And so because of this, Congress then again tweaked the legislation and improved it, and it's still not where it needs to be. We need more transparency where the money actually went from the Treasury Department. But we tweaked the legislation a little bit so that more local banks and smaller banks who have regularly, relationships with many of these smaller or minority-owned businesses, they would be able to help process and get these loans to everyday folks in our community. So that's just one example of how everyday people concerns have been brought up to Congress's attention, and we knew, okay, we did one thing, but we needed to do to make it better, to make it more effective.
No, yeah, that's amazing. And just to ask another follow-up question regarding that, I think, with my company, what was interesting is we actually, when the second round of funding came out, we actually had an accountant provide just an overall framework around PPP because a lot of people just didn't understand it.
Right.
That was one, and then the other was around EIDL, which was not talked about as much, where there was the $1,000 grant, which we obviously encourage people to apply for, but then also there was the SBA loan. And what was interesting, it's going to be interesting to see how the numbers play out, but for women of color specifically, a lot of them are not taking salaries from their companies because they're side hustling, because they're not getting paid the appropriate amount at work, right? And for that reason, they did not qualify for PPP because they took the profit from their companies and they literally put it back into the business,
right,
which ultimately is actually the thing that you would think would be the most prudent to do as you're trying to grow your business. So what we did I actually hosted it. We fleshed out and talked more about EIDL so that a lot of women of color could have the opportunity to at least get the working capital loan, even though they did not qualify for PPP. So we had people reach out to us and let us know that they got $30,000, $20,000, $100,000 for their businesses. And quite frankly, the terms around EIDL are really strong. They're actually really good terms. Even if you're looking to raise capital, I think it's probably some of the best in class that a company could get in order to be able to capitalize their business. So, from your perspective, are there going to be any additional changes to either PPP or EIDL? And also, is the EIDL grant going to come back? Like, is that on the table? If you know.
So I think that there are still, I want to say there are ongoing negotiations. I just can't say that today that they are ongoing, but there needs to be continued to be more negotiations. The House passed something called the HEROES Act, for those people who might not know, which had additional help for many different communities across the country. And so we're still hoping that the Senate takes that up. But if they don't, yes, we need more support for communities, including small business owners, with coronavirus relief money. We also need to know, we need to have more transparency where that money went. We have not been able to get from the Department of Treasury a full accounting, especially of the smaller loans. They release the amounts for the larger numbers, but we still need to find out where the money went, how much of it went to our communities and our districts. But if I could rewind for 1 second, a project that I had worked on maybe like 2 years ago, I worked on it for many years, but which really became helpful during the coronavirus pandemic was, and this is an example of why it's important to have equitable resources in our various districts, especially in communities of color. So my district never had a small business development center, SBDC, and there was one in Long Island City, for example. And so we wanted to, and we worked many years to secure the funding, and we finally did, like a year or two ago. We got a small business help center in our district that had staff that spoke multiple languages, and it was actually really timely. And this was just, trying to get what many other districts have, right? And this was actually really timely because when coronavirus hit and small businesses needed help, you know, our center became really busy. Businesses were reaching out to them in various languages, folks who might be, you know, first-time business owners, and they reached out to them and they really, I want to put a plug, it's located in Queens College, and they really provided a lot of help. And so this is an example where if you have more resources in a community, more equitable resources, you are able to get the community members what they need and what they deserve in the long term.
No, yeah, I mean, obviously that's great work, and clearly I think that's why representation matters, because that's sometimes how you start to bridge some of those gaps. So, you know, offline afterwards, I would love, you know, for us to continue the conversation about kind of like what we're seeing on the ground with our business owners, because we specifically work with women of color.
Would love that. Maybe I can ask a few questions, Adeola.
Sure.
Really nice. And, you know, I just want to say a quick hello and thank you to everyone on the call too, because it's not often where we get to be together and bond and learn from each other as a network of strong and accomplished women. And I'm so thankful to everyone on this Zoom today and what you do. So I know earlier you mentioned the Avant-Garde Network, which promotes diversity and inclusion, and you've created initiatives such as Africa 2030, Diversity Dollars and Disruption, love these names, Women of Color and Capital, and the Dealmakers Roundtable. Tell us a little bit about your mission with all these incredible and creative platforms, and why these platforms are so important for affecting growth and change in the workplace, and what can we all learn from that?
Yeah, you know, Avant-Garde Network is my company, and essentially what we do, as I said before, is we have a very strong focus on economic impact. And so what we want to do is really help individuals think about what are the opportunities that are coming 20, 30 years down the line, but also how do we prepare people for those things? And how do we bridge gaps and what I say, kind of get people from 0 to 1 sometimes. So I can use Women of Color and Capital, for example. Under that specific initiative, what we're looking to do there is, you know, give women of color capital, right? So what we focus on there is 4 specific things. 1, helping women build intergenerational wealth. 2, get capital for their business. 3, learn how to become investors. And 4, fund management. And we see all of these things as a 360 ecosystem, because as we're putting our content together, our speakers, our experts, and when we have our conference, for example, what happens is you have one room of women who are looking for capital for their businesses, and we're providing different types of resources and trainings and things like that, master classes. And then literally in the room next door, you have women who are in a position to invest in companies, and one just didn't know about the opportunities, want to understand a little bit more about, you know, term sheets and things like that. And so what we see is, obviously, while we're waiting for, you know, the government to do what they're supposed to do, or banks are to do what they're supposed to do, like we're literally utilizing this to be able to bridge the gap. So we actually had the first conference around that last year, and we had over 500 women of color attend right here in New York City. And then also what was not mentioned, but another initiative of ours is diversity in commercial real estate, right? So we think that for those, you know, in the development space, affordable housing, all of these things that are around us should also reflect the people who are in those communities. And we find that a lot of people are not in these spaces because they just do not know that they exist. And so we hosted the conference, our inaugural conference actually on that last year. And now that's literally the largest conference in the nation that specifically focuses on getting people of color into commercial real estate. And so the way we kind of affect the workplace and provide opportunities there is, not only do people come to our conference and get investment dollars or business partners, they also get jobs. And also the information that we are providing to the network allows them to have a more holistic view, not only about their careers, but about themselves. Because for me, it's like when we're thinking about any woman or man who attends our events, the reality is you may not be in that specific job forever, right? People move around. And so for us, our goal is to empower the individual, and that then helps, the workplace. When we help someone have the opportunity to work at a commercial real estate firm, regardless of how long they've worked there or not, right? Now that's going to help them. Not only is that going to help bring diversity to that and a new voice to that company, but also that individual has the opportunity to build a skill set that they may not have had before.
That's true. That's amazing. And what an incredible number of platforms you provide for folks to network and to empower them. For everyday folks, what are some examples for our tribe here today in regards to actionable items that can lead to policy change? What can every one of us be doing from a grassroots level to use our voices?
Yeah, I mean, I think, there's so many different types of things. And I think one thing that's interesting now, in addition to the three things I named before, is now due to, the current political environment, everything that's happening in Black Lives Matter and things like that. What's interesting is now even employers or companies are actually starting to participate in how we build better communities. And what's also happening there is a lot of these firms are either, reaching out to the people of color in their spaces, or people are just taking the initiative to say, like, this is something that I think that you should get involved with. I heard about this initiative. I think our company should participate. I would love to lead a specific initiative, or I think our company should just take a specific stance and initiative on this space. I think the opportunity to kind of talk more about what's happening in the world is happening now. And then also on top of that, I think, millennials are really, I guess they've polled us. I've never been polled before, but it's correct, that we're really purpose driven, right? We want to have positive impact. And if companies want to stay relevant, they have to figure out a way to not only drive their profit, but figure out how they're going to be more purposeful, because great talent will leave your company and go somewhere else where they're feeling that they're doing great work. So, on an individual level, I think that's an area that people can get involved in. On the policy level, again, it's really voting. Congresswoman Meng pointed it out, reach out to your congresswoman or man. And also, at least I know in New York City, our congresspersons are always willing to have meetings. I think some people don't realize, like, you can actually schedule a meeting and sit down and ask for what you want. And we have to figure out how we can participate. And if people do not have the ability to even, maybe even schedule a meeting, a lot of our congresspersons, they have listservs. Get on the listserv and understand what's happening and tweet. I think tweeting has a lot more power than people think. I find now more so than any other time. 10 years ago, it wasn't necessarily a legitimate platform to get in touch with people. But now, if you tweet something, it's very likely that you will get a response.
I've literally seen people who are wrongly delayed for whatever reason at airports. And while their phone calls might be going unanswered, their tweets seem to be receiving quick responses. So
exactly. No, that's true. Agreed. I remember there was one time where I was flying to Minneapolis or something, and our flight out of JFK, our flight literally was delayed from like 8 a.m. to 2 p.m.
Oh.
I started tweeting, and then I got a response in like 5 minutes. Yep. They followed up with me on via email. They even gave me some free miles. So, nice. don't look over the power of the tweet.
Yeah. So take Adeola's advice. Those are my questions for now.
Great advice, ladies. And we actually had a question that was just entered into our chat box. Kate, do you want to come on screen and ask your question to Adeola and Congresswoman Meng? If not, we can ask it for you, whatever you prefer. Perfect. Just unmute yourself.
Hi, thanks so much. Well, I have two questions. In regard to tweeting, who should we be tweeting at? You know, like what hashtag should we be including? I think when you're tweeting out and you don't have, you know, you have 100 followers, you know, you're not necessarily going to get that recognition. So do you have any helpful hints in regard to what we should be doing in that regard?
Yeah, you know, what's interesting is I actually don't even think you need a hashtag. Depending on who the person is, right? It's public facing, right? Everyone wants to look good public facing. So I think you can really send out any tweet. I mean, when I tweeted Delta, I probably only had 10 followers, but they responded because other people, because the thing too is there's also the potential of a chain reaction, right? You tweet something, your followers, even if you only have 10 of them, retweet, then next thing you know, it's a bigger issue. So a lot of times people really want to nip those things in the bud just because of the potential to grow into a larger thing. At least that's my perspective. Congresswoman Meng, if you have a perspective.
Yeah, I mean, and people tweet for different reasons, right? Like in the case of an airline delay, you know, obviously you want to get someone's attention. So you, in your tweet, in your message, you would include like their handle, right? Their account name. And sometimes, you know, especially if you're not very confident or you're new to using social media, I think it's a really useful tool just to even read and to learn about what's going on. Like I like to follow a lot of news media outlets and reporters because oftentimes before they get like an article written in print, they're tweeting about certain issues first. So, you know, you can, as you create your account, you can follow, you know, whether it's New York Times, Daily News, New York Post, you know, and then you can see what, or people that you enjoy, that you support, or even people that you don't support.
Cool. And then my second question for you again, Congressman, how important is collaboration? I mean, I think we are so politically divided as a country right now, and trying to understand how important it is collaboration and getting policymakers to deeply understand their constituent needs.
Look, you know, I've always, since day one, and it's not always popular to hear, but, you know, I've prided myself on collaborating with people, whether it's someone from across the aisle or whether it's someone who's worked on a similar issue, but from another district or another state. I think, you know, one thing that many of us in Congress try to do, and I know it's not always popular for the media to report it, it's not always exciting, but we really do work with a lot of members on a regular basis. You know, a lot of the bills that I passed, whether it was under President Obama or this president, whether it was when the Democrats were in the minority or in the majority, you know, we've worked with many other colleagues in order for the bills to be passed. And so, you know, it's a lot more common than people think.
Yes.
Thank you.
Great question, Kate. Yeah, and I have a question by taking Kate's question further. So as an organization co-founder, so we have women as entrepreneurs and corporate C-suite. We have 80% entrepreneurs and 20% corporate C-suite. So how can we as an organization contribute to the equality, gender equality, or different minorities equality? How can we contribute? So as an organization, we have raised a lot of funds and we donated to organizations that are under prestigious organizations. We donate to Black community, Asian community, but we want to do more. So how can we contribute more? Maybe give us some specific actionable strategies. So we're happy to contribute.
I mean, I don't want to speak for the members of your organization, and I don't know like what interest areas they are, and maybe that's something for you all to figure that out. But obviously now in the time of coronavirus, people are really needing really basic items like supporting food pantries, for example, might be something that is of interest. Organizations that might, you know, help empower women of color or communities of color. And it really depends on your interest area. We're always happy to provide a list, whether it's, you know, maybe it's, you know, helping, immigration-related matters, helping the protesters around the country, legal support. You know, there's so many different topics that we can help provide.
Thank you.
And we have one last quick question that's just come in from Nikolai. Nikolai, would you like to ask your question before we wrap?
Sure. Hi, everybody. And thank you to our amazing panelists for their work across the board and for joining us today and sharing your experiences with us. One of the things that I'm really interested in is it always seems to fall on the marginalized to resist against their own marginalization. And so my question is twofold. One, what tools have you found to be most effective to bring supposed allies into the fold and to, galvanize them towards your cause? And the second part of that is, as women of color yourselves, what kind of balance do you find that you strike between resisting and recharging for yourself so you're able to join the fight again tomorrow?
I can try to go first. I don't know how I recharge. I think probably everyone on this call has a different answer, and it's hard. I've got 2 kids who are, in remote schooling right now, so every day is a different day for us. But I will say, in terms of supporting each other, I think, and Adeola touched upon this earlier, this is a really critical time in our nation's history. And coronavirus really brings so much to light. In the early months of February and March in New York City, for example, and across the country, many Asian communities were really feeling discrimination. Like, people thought, okay, if you go to eat at a Chinese restaurant, you're going to catch coronavirus, right? Congress has a bipartisan resolution that I helped draft, actually, that condemns anti-Asian sentiment. And with this resolution, we had leaders from various communities across the country support it. So one of the first supporters was Congresswoman Karen Bass. She's also the head of the Congressional Black Caucus in Congress. There were national groups like the NAACP, the Urban League, Black student associations from various college campuses who came out very publicly to support this resolution and to condemn the discrimination. And I say this a lot these days because we're having, in light of, I guess it started sort of after the murder of George Floyd, we started having a lot of conversations, and many of them were difficult with maybe the older Asian American members in our community who genuinely wanted to know why people were protesting, what the Black Lives Matter movement was about. And we had and continue to have a tremendous and rare opportunity for us to strengthen our relationships with our allies and to support each other. It's really important for different communities. Like I talked about when I first got into politics and I didn't have an Asian caucus, which is like a high school club, like Asian club, when I got to the legislature, and I joined my colleagues in the Black and Latino community, and they really helped me. And the Asian community has accomplished so much because of the struggles and achievements of the Black and Latino communities who've come before us, right? You think about civil rights fights leading to immigration. And so there are so many opportunities nowadays, I think, that we have to strengthen these relationships.
Yeah, and I will, kind of, I guess, give my perspective on that. One, ditto to everything that Congresswoman Meng said first. Secondly, I think that the easiest answer to the question, I'll take the first question around, how do you recharge? I think it's, for me, it's about boundaries with your time, knowing, hey, like, this is my day off, I don't do anything. And I think for women that are go-getters, people that are go-getters, you're always giving, but recharging is important. I believe that physical, spiritual, and mental health are all important. And so if you say, guess what, this weekend I'm off and I'm not picking up my phone, then great, you should do it. Sometimes you have to delete Instagram That's probably my demographic. Sometimes you don't want to engage in the comments on Facebook regarding politics. Like sometimes you just need to say no. So that's a part of it. And then again, just clear boundaries for yourself. For me personally, I do it ahead of time. I have a lot of things I'm working on. So I pick my schedule. Guess what? This weekend I'm off. I'm not picking up a call regarding this or that. It's relaxation weekend for me. And then also in terms of your question around, I guess you would say, like, you know, the burden for those who are marginalized to kind of be leading the charge. I think it's very interesting because, you know, I think now we're at the point where communities that are not marginalized are starting to, I guess, maybe even feel more comfortable around having some of these conversations, and sometimes feeling as if they don't want to be the ones to take up the space. But what I found specifically though is, if the time is now to do anything. So if you believe that the cause that you're working on is a worthy one, like, continue to do it. I can tell you, around Women of Color in Capital, when we launched that conference, we had $0 in the bank account. I didn't know how we were gonna pay for all of these people, but I knew, I could feel based on the things that I've been putting together that there was strong interest in this. And then so I went to different people that I knew. They literally cut checks, and then we were able to pay, you know, for this big venue, which now, you know, we started off having literally about 500 people or so that were kind of interested in that initiative. Now we literally have almost 5,000. It's looking like before the end of the year, we'll likely have about 10,000 women that have, you know, participated and gained some knowledge or understanding around our work. And then now that we've started obviously continuing doing what we're doing, what we've also seen is now more companies are coming to us, right? Goldman Sachs is participating, Charles Schwab is participating, even individual sponsors are participating. And that's because they're seeing our work, right? Now, with that said, you know, for us, we are very specific about highlighting people of color at our conferences. So when we have the conversation around sponsorship and who is speaking and things like that, you know, we say, we want this company to elevate a woman of color or a person of color for this conference. And if that's not what you're willing to do, then this most likely is probably not the conference for you. And I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that. They don't have to cut the check if they don't want to. But for me, it's about providing that information and elevating people in these spaces, because a lot of times being marginalized also includes not having a seat at the table and not having opportunity to share your perspective and your voice. And for me, that's really important.
Thank you both so much. What an incredible conversation. We are so grateful for your time and your energy. Nikolai, those were wonderful questions as well. Thank you for asking them and putting yourself out there. We're just so grateful for you both to be here with us this evening with our community, to share your insights, your knowledge, your stories, and to teach us ways that we can actively get involved, because we are all here wanting to do more. So thank you so much for a wonderful evening. We really appreciate it. And we hope to welcome you back soon. And Summer just dropped in Adeola and Congresswoman Meng's Instagram accounts into our chat box. We'll drop in their websites so you can check out their work, stay in touch, stay connected. And thank you. I'm wishing everyone a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
Great.
Keep
in touch.
Bye.
Have a great week, my dear.
Bye.
Bye.